Hey everyone, welcome to ThetaWave. My name is Ryan Reed. I'm an AI engineer and singer, musician, and songwriter. I'm here with my co host, Jacob Holland, who is a neuroscience researcher as well as a singer as well.
I can sing. Oh, pretty good.
I just said that.
Yes,
I was
pretty
listening
well.
to him sing earlier while we were testing.
Yeah, I
It's
couldn't think of anything to
beautiful.
say, so I was just singing songs. It's
I'm
wonderful.
going Les Mis.
Mhm.
So, Jacob, do we have any updates for everyone? And what are we going over today?
Yes. So if you didn't see yesterday, we got a couple of test live streams done, but sadly we weren't able to do a full podcast because, well, it was just 4.5 hours of just craziness. But today we got everything ready, got things done, ready to do this podcast. So obviously we're going to follow the general format. We're going to have an hour of just discussing, really what's been on our mind recently. And then we're going to dive a little bit into 9-MeBC, which is a potential cognitive enhancer nootropic, as well as neuroprotective agent. And then we'll dive into a little bit about the prefrontal cortex. And then to top it off, we're going to end it with the generative adversarial networks. I said it
You got
right.
it right.
There we go. All right,
Yes.
perfect. So that's
Dude,
what
you
we'll be
nailed
dealing with.
that. That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been working hard on it all day. So, I mean, I don't really know what it is,
Right.
but
Well, we'll cover
I'm
that.
excited to
Yeah,
learn.
we'll
That's
cover
for
that.
sure.
We yesterday we had a little bit of tongue tripping going on over that word.
I kept calling it adversarial, like general adversarial networks. I was like, no, that is
It's
not it
hard.
at all.
It's hard, especially if you don't know what it is. It
Mm.
doesn't really. Once you know what it is, kind of makes sense. But
All right, perfect.
um,
So, what's been really boggling your mind
well, what's been
recently?
boggling my mind recently actually has been these AI cameras that we now have.
Really? You mean our camera crew, of course,
Yes,
who
indeed.
who follow us around.
Yes.
Yes. See, Dave, move it a little more this way.
Hey,
Thank you,
Bob,
Dave.
make sure you get my face. Yep, there you go.
Yes. If you can't see. Okay, so yeah, they are AI cameras, guys. I was just kidding. We don't have a camera crew. We can't really afford that. But we've got something even better, honestly. We're past the age of needing, camera crew. We
Mhm.
have AI. It's
Yeah.
better.
Not to disrespect any producers out there,
No, of course not.
uh,
Y'all are still better than these guys. Yeah.
and not to suggest that Java is about to become obsolete, but
Perhaps.
maybe?
Perhaps.
No, there's I think that that's actually a really good topic, 'cause I know that there's a lot of concern over whether or not AI is going to start replacing people's jobs, taking people's jobs, putting them
Okay.
out of.
I understand their concern because there's the thought put out. It's like, well, of course AI isn't going to take over everybody's jobs. Obviously, it's going to create new jobs and new opportunities because look at the last time we had a technology revolution, right?
Mhm.
It created more jobs, even though initially there were some jobs lost in the process. But with AI, I don't know. It might be a little different. The combination of artificial intelligence with technology, with machinery combining together might actually cause some worry and valid worry at that, potentially.
Yeah, I think that, if I had to guess at it, I'd say likely a couple things will happen, especially once, our hardware catches up to the point where we are able to run much more comprehensive tasks,
Mhm.
and much more intricate models. Um, but I think likely 2 things will happen. First, I think that society will attempt to compete with AIs for a while in the way that, in the sense that people will try and evolve their jobs to be more complex than an AI model can handle.
Mhm.
So, in the case of a director, if somebody is directing a podcast or something along those lines, doing social media direction, for a company or something like that, they will try to evolve into a more complicated job,
Mhm.
form of that job, such as um, film directing or something like that, that is requires, at least in the early stages of its development, will still require human beings to occupy.
Yeah.
And so there probably will be a reduction in some jobs, but that will also um, cause a kind of a competition and a race to get to better, more complex
Yeah, just
jobs.
some good healthy rivalry to
Right.
combat each other.
But I think what eventually is going to happen there is that we are going to get to the point technologically where working is no longer really a necessity for a lot of things, and machines are capable of taking over so many of the tasks that our technological state no longer fits with our systems of commerce and our societal setup.
Mhm.
And I think that's going to cause major issues that are inevitable. Um, it's not like that stuff can be avoided when there's progress. When there's progress, we're always going to get to that point because we're going to try and develop things to make our lives easier and more efficient.
Mhm.
But we have to be able to change our mindsets and our ways of looking at society and life along with that development and be within a system that allows that change to happen. And we are not, which is why I think that that will eventually kind of bring us to a little bit of some sort of turning breaking point.
Yeah.
Um, it could be something akin to Great Depression. It could be more subtle than that. It could be bigger than that. But at some point, I think we're gonna reach a point where our society sees the need to change and is fed up with a system that won't allow it to change in the way that it
Mhm.
needs to change.
I think that that actually raises a really good point. I was actually talking on YouTube on in this comment section about this topic. There's kind of I think mainly what's holding us back from that revitalization happening now is the anxiety of death. I think they are fearful of what is to come if they go outside of the current workings of the system. And I think that you have to get to a condition of or this threshold of suffering to where it cannot really be taken anymore, to where actually survival surpasses your anxiety of going against the system because it's already so corrupt in the first place. And you can get convinced of that with which we've
Mhm.
seen before in history. People get convinced that the system doesn't work, and so you have to destroy it, or it can be a true justified system that needs to be overthrown. And I think actually that there is a third option. I think maybe it's not possible, but taking our resources and using the technology that we have now to actually
Mhm.
live more holistic lifestyles. Like, here's something that I saw really cool, where it's like you really only need 1 acre of land to even fully sustain yourself. And then with the combination of, let's say, AI robots, like for the Tesla robot, for example, right now, $30,000, which
Mhm.
seems like a lot, but it's comparable to like a car, a
Mhm.
down payment on a home. And if that could be used to fully sustain like your gardens, your farming, your simple, like fix ups around the house, like this is something that I saw that I thought was really cool. Where it's like really all you need is 1 acre, really just 1 acre of land to fully sustain yourself. And we definitely have enough, like 1 acre of land per family. There is so much land that is
That's about
completely
probably about the
untoiled.
average, which
Hmm.
everybody in America has, is
Yeah.
about 1 acre.
Hmm. And if you're
Um,
able to share those resources as a community, working as communities all together, I
yeah.
think that could be great.
I mean, you wouldn't even need to have to do it on a ownership plot by plot
Hmm.
basis. Like, if you shift your paradigm that you view the world in, to not be one of ownership, of, like, buying and selling and ownership, um, but to be one of more of community and contributing to society in some way, the it becomes possible for society to be the one that provides the needs for everyone as a
Hmm.
whole. From a technological standpoint, you can have a lot of these systems automated, like the farming and whatnot. And even now, we can even automate housing production.
Yeah.
And so
Oh my
there's
gosh, did you see those new 3D model
oh
printers for
yeah, oh
houses?
yeah. No,
They're beautiful. They work so
I've been
well.
following those, like, since they were first
At
released.
first, they were like, sure, I'm sure it'll be something in the future.
No, but
That
they're
future is now.
yeah,
Mhm,
it is they're insane, and that allows for mass fast production of housing, which is one of the basic needs for
mhm.
people. And so now you have your food and your residency automated.
Just don't let BlackRock get the 3D house printers. Yeah, they cannot own those, 'cause otherwise we might be doomed,
Um,
we'll say.
they That's why I think that, and if you take into consideration the fact that, as of right now, most of our farming, probably 99, it's just pulling that out of my ass, but like 99% of farming is not automated. If I had to guess at it,
Mhm. Yeah.
the or is not fully automated, I would say, not even close to fully automated. And yet we are still producing more than enough food for everyone in the world several times over.
Yeah.
In fact, we pay people to stop producing.
It's crazy, but
And so if we take that into consideration, along with the inefficiencies in our uh, food production, crop production processes, the optimizations that can be implemented, such as I was looking at, I was trying to come up with a completely optimized and automated agricultural system at one
yeah.
point, and I was looking into things at the time. It kind of stemmed from the fact that I was looking into things like the different effects that certain light wavelengths have on plant development and growth at
Yeah.
different stages. And the there was a lot of really interesting results and a lot of really interesting things that made me think light in and of itself, controlling the light in and of itself at the different stages, would give you the ability to automate the fine tuning of healthier, more resilient, more productive plants.
Yeah.
And there has actually been research done on some of the increases in yields that can happen with various plant crop types as a result of certain wavelength control. Um, and those increases are not insignificant. And then there's been studies also done on the effect of nutrient optimization within soil and what that can have on the yield and speed of plant growth and temperature control, all those kind of things. And so you can literally automate every single aspect of that system, including the optimum water levels for each plant to get. You can have drones that are trained to go around and gauge the health of each plant. They already have they already have leaf recognition systems and plant recognition systems that are used to judge the health of specific plants and can tell you kind of where it's at. And so you combine that with drones, with reinforcement learning that control them and go around and check on the plants and make sure that they're healthy, and then tune the parameter. They automatically tune the parameters of the system that they need to tune in order to help that plant along.
Mm.
And now you have a system that literally grows itself and will produce. I calculated out at one point the amount of yield increase that you could get from all the optimizations that I knew of, that I was thinking about, that I actually had statistics for,
Mhm.
with the common yield from an acre um, of I think it was tomatoes that I was looking at, but I calculated out the percentage increase, and it was massive. Like, it was a insane increase
Wow.
in yield and decrease in yield time.
Mm.
So it got the plants from point A to point B much faster and could control their cycles.
Mm. Did you ever so I actually haven't heard a lot about using light to do that, which is actually fascinating. It makes complete sense, obviously. But have you ever thought about incorporating maybe different frequency
Oh, yeah.
patterns into that
That was
model as
part of
well?
what I looked at. It had that its impact in comparison to light was relatively small.
Yeah.
Light had a way bigger impact, but um, I still did look at incorporating that into it.
I know frequency is definitely a lot more mainstream when it comes to like revolutionizing plant growth.
Right.
And to me, I'm like, sure, I'm sure it probably has some sort of effect, but I wondered because of how popular it was getting, how much of an effect was it really happening?
It was one of the probably the first things that was really investigated frequency rise, probably because of the development of our ability to control and detect certain specific sound frequencies versus light. Light is a lot
Mhm.
harder for
That is true.
us to do that. And so I imagine that came about first because of just the ease of the fact that technology was already developed and was more readily available.
And do you ever sing songs to your
No,
plants? No?
I don't own plants,
Oh,
but
should. Come on, you gotta be a little more holistic, man.
I
You
wouldn't
know?
own
Feel
plants.
nature.
I wouldn't own plants to be holistic. I'd own plants to experiment on them.
That oh, yes. That's actually one of the things that I've really wanted to look into is genetically experimenting with
Mhm.
plants. And I've seen some kits. Actually, I think my phone is actually reading my mind because I thought about it and then I saw like, genetic manipulation kits for plants. I was like, "No way. Should I buy that?" I'm like, "No, I can't. I have to get an AI camera." That is more
I have to
important.
talk about it on a
Yes,
podcast.
exactly. Talk about it on podcast instead of actually doing it. See, that's honestly what, the best thing to do is just instead of actually doing it, talk about it on a podcast.
Talk
Get
about
that
doing
little
it.
dopamine rush
Yeah.
about thinking about it while not doing the task. It's wonderful.
Except for the fact that we have um, kind of planned a lot of our whole thing around doing actual experiments on
Dude,
the
I am
podcast.
so excited to start doing actual experiments. It's gonna be
Mhm.
incredible,
Yeah.
genuinely.
Yeah, our biggest thing there is the money that will be required for the
Mhm.
instruments we're gonna
So
need.
feel free to donate. Be
Yes.
awesome. Give us a super like. Just kidding. We don't need your money,
Is
of
there
course.
is there super likes on YouTube?
I'm pretty sure.
Really?
Yeah, I've seen them before. I've seen them on videos. I don't know if you can do it on a live stream.
What is it
What
called
would
on
happen
Twitch?
if I sent money to myself?
Oh, it's
Can
called
I
the
do that?
sub on
Yeah,
Twitch.
it's
That's
called a
what it is.
sub on
Okay.
Twitch. There is a super like. Where'd it go? Come on, guys. Give me my super like. Unless I'm on ThetaWave. No. Ah, whatever. I was gonna try to send money to myself, but didn't work. You think that would actually boost the stream, perhaps? If you just like send money to yourself, it'll like get into the YouTube system.
I don't think so.
Ah,
I
maybe.
I honestly, the more that I learn about YouTube and its mechanics and the actually experience them, I think the biggest thing for YouTube that determines whether or not something shows up for somebody in their feed is genuinely the content of the item. Like they will they will if you don't upload subtitles for your video, they will automatically run subtitle recognition unless you tell them not to.
Yeah.
And so I think that they pull from both the chapter markers that are put in descriptions that kind of mark the points in the videos where is a switch in content. And I think they use when they're available, the subtitles for a video in order to determine its content and the relevance to the person's search or their likes and dislikes, slash the transcriptions of other people's videos that that person has watched.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, it was actually really cool on one of the videos. I can't find it again, but there was this AI that was like, I can give you a summary of the video. I was like, what? Give me a summary of this podcast right now. And then it did. And then I would like ask questions about furthering like what they were talking about specifically here and over here. And it did really well. I was like, wow, this AI fully understands. And it's like
Mhm.
integrated into YouTube. I mean, I think it's still experimental because I haven't seen it on any other videos. But it was really cool when I did see it.
Yeah.
I was like, "Nice. Okay, YouTube's kinda stepping up their game. They're kind of getting integrated into AI."
Oh,
That's
they've
actually
been
interesting.
it. They've been for a while, but they're just making the um, those features now available to both consumers and
Yeah.
producers. Like I think there's a feature in YouTube Studio that that uses AI to help create uh, content ideas as well as
Oh, yeah.
thumbnails and whatnot. I don't use
Oh,
it because
yeah, I saw that.
I did use it and it was kind of cool.
Mhm.
It was nice to have that fully integrated. It did feel like a little bit of a beta feature, like
Yeah.
something that they were testing out
It's
because
pretty new.
it wasn't good enough for me to want to use. It would be good enough if it was kind of a side, if your YouTube channel was kind of just a side thing.
Yeah.
But especially with the thumbnails,
The thumbnails were mid, honestly. They were pretty bad. I mean, I did it for 2 of my videos because I usually just, like I just use a photo of, like, some when I'm using my hands or something in the video, and then I'll just do that and put some, like, text over it. And instead, I was like, "You know what? Let's try this, you know, AI, see what it does." And it just picks random moments from
yeah,
the video, which is like, "Okay, it's fine. That's kinda what I was gonna do anyways, so I'm just gonna use it."
right.
But actually, YouTube seems to have stepped up its game for the most part, when it comes to like thumbnail creation, like you doing it yourself and as well as like adjusting and tweaking your video, I was like, nice. Okay, I can do a
Mm.
lot of this stuff actually from YouTube,
Yeah.
which is really cool. I mean, I don't really use
I'm
it.
I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to editing tools because I'm used to using the professional
Mhm.
tools for stuff. I think I kind of set myself up for that when I was a kid and asked my parents for Pro Tools for Christmas, which for those that don't know, Pro Tools is it's a digital audio workstation that is like industry standard for studios. It's the digital audio workstation that they use for recording um, in settings when they need things to be professional, consistent, and like it's just the cream de la creme of digital audio workstations. And I had no business messing with that when I
So
was that
now your
age.
standards are just like
But
super
now my
high.
standards are super high,
Mhm.
and I tend to have difficulty. And then like transferring from that to what I did early in adulthood, which was a lot of branding and marketing and whatnot. The I have problems using amateur products or
Yeah.
things that don't let me do things to the best of my ability.
Oh, that makes sense actually. I want to get to that point. I will eventually, but we'll see. Because I use what I
It's
get. I use like CapCut, which honestly isn't terrible. It's not bad. It's a fairly decent,
yeah.
like editing software.
There's something to be said for simple tools that do what you need
Mhm.
them to do if the task doesn't need to be
Yeah.
complicated. But I just inevitably run into situations where when using a tool, even if it works for like the first couple times using it, where I hit a point where it's not able to do what something I really need to do with it.
Yeah.
And so it's for me, it's easier to just get good using the tools, or the best tool,
Mhm.
that has all the options available.
Yeah, you showed me that one video editing software that was like for movies practically. Which one was that?
Um,
Like the movie grade
right.
production one.
Why am I blanking on this name?
He's gonna check it real quick. He's gonna
I'm
find it.
going to
He's going to find it. Where is it? See, this is where a producer would come in handy.
I want to say it's I've used so many over the years. It's kind of difficult for me to
That's fair.
keep all of their names in my head.
I'm gonna take a drink while you look that up. Some ginger ale. It's really solid. I love ginger ale. I used to hate it, but it's actually pretty good now. I don't know. There's something about it that just kind of calms me.
DaVinci Resolve.
Da Vinci Resolve. Yes. Da Vinci. That's right. If something has the name Da Vinci in it, you know it's going to be good. That's all I'm going to say.
It better be. Yeah.
Got a high standard to live up to there.
Yeah.
I've used some other tools called Da Vinci. I don't
DaVinci
remember the
Resolve
name.
is really nice because it has a somewhat accurate audio transcription feature built into it.
Hmm.
So you can take your videos and turn them into subtitles.
Oh, wait, turn the videos into subtitles?
Well, you can transcribe the videos and make subtitles out of the transcriptions.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid. Pretty integrative, I will say.
Yes, indeed.
I don't need to use that if I ever need to make a movie or anything. Otherwise, I'll just stick with CapCut.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it's helpful for YouTube. It's what I use for our YouTube channel
Yeah.
because it's better than a lot of the other alternatives as far as accuracy out there goes, and it means I have to do less editing. In fact, sometimes I do no editing whenever I use the subtitles and upload them.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wait, so are the subtitles in the video, or, like, are they put in YouTube? Or, like, you can, like, turn them on and off in, like, the
The
section?
subtitles are a YouTube thing. So
YouTube thing, okay.
you upload the transcription to YouTube and they turn them into subtitles.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful. It's
They'll
nice.
they'll sync it with your video. So they'll find the basically like read the text and then synchronize it with the video.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
I actually should probably do that for my videos, though I will say they're honestly just for me. Actually, one of the most recent videos is actually kind of something I wanted to talk about that I thought was really fascinating.
Hmm.
Kind of a realization for me, actually, was that my will to live should come from the acceptance of my own death. And that struck me as true, at least for myself, maybe not for every individual. But when I came to terms with my own, you know, just kind of not meaningless existence, but a small existence, and that it is simply one little excitation and infinite amounts of excitations in this infinite universe, that to me, coming to terms with that actually made me feel bigger, not smaller, as if it actually was worth something, as if it was working in conjunction with all the other forces of reality. And I was a part of that in one fundamental whole. And that sounds a little bit metaphysical and woo woo, but that's kind of like how I felt on the inside from accepting my own death.
Hmm.
If that makes sense.
It does. The For me, I definitely understand that. I think for me, that is less. I still agree that for me, that acceptance of death as as a likely outcome is an important motivator. But for me, that motivation doesn't come from a kind of a desire to use that time to make my footprint as big as possible. It comes from a desire to extend the amount of time that I'm walking around
Hmm.
and to try and prevent that for as long as possible so that I had more footprints, you know?
That actually raises an interesting observation because for me, making the biggest footprint isn't winning a Nobel Prize or becoming famous. That to me doesn't even leave a very large footprint at all. To me, leaving the largest footprint is enhancing your conscious experience and
Hmm.
furthering that for the longest period of time. And even if nobody was aware of my existence except for myself, but I walked in that to me would leave what I would say is the biggest footprint for myself is the contents of my conscious
But once you
experience
no longer exist, a footprint for yourself is just a footprint for nothing,
for me
but you're no longer you because you're dead.
in that moment. What about in my past moments? The contents of my experience will live on forever in that moment.
It depends on your, I guess, your fundamental view of time and whether or not you're talking from a perspective of within the kind of dimensions that we are able to process, or you are speaking from a hypothetical external perspective.
I guess the hypothetical external perspective would be the death of myself in the moment experiencing death. That would be the hypothetical, not necessarily the external forces that keep my memories and my experience locked in this kind of other dimensional understanding of the time frame, but rather the moment that myself is disillusioned and my biological clock stops ticking, why would there be a need for me to care about the further inference after that? It seems that it would stay stagnant. And that to me is completely okay.
That's a valid point to make, is that why would you care about what happens after your death, because you'll be dead and you won't be around to experience it.
Mm,
But I think there's a for most people, there's a fundamental will to live on, and that takes f shape usually in different ways. For a lot of people, it's through having children. They have
mhm,
children to feel like their a piece of them is surviving. And for some people, it is making a big impact so that the memory of them is carried on for as long as possible.
yeah,
And so I think that can that concepts can take shape in a lot of different ways, but it's almost, like I was talking about, for me, it takes shape in trying to actually make my existence
longer.
as long as possible,
Mhm,
and if I were to if I were to live forever, as long as there was new stuff to learn and there was things that I didn't know, I'd be okay with that.
yeah, I mean, you obviously wanna maximize your experience in every possible way. And I think if you did live for, I would say, at least a couple thousand years, I think you might actually be able to do that potentially if, nuclear war doesn't just completely destroy us and we all die,
Do what?
like, be able to not fully understand. I mean, it becomes a epistemological question, right? Of the nature of truth and of facts and of, reality, and if it is set in a way that we can get to the point of no further understanding of what is out there. And if that is possible, then I would say in a few thousand years that, who knows how much available knowledge we'll be able to achieve. And will that be everything? I don't, it'll be something. That's for sure. And I kind of want to be around for that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, because I figure, we're kind of on the edge of a lot of leaps forward technologically and medically and whatnot,
Mhm.
and so kind of my way of looking at it is I'm in a really good position right now to try and extend my life with current technology long enough that future technology can start being developed and take over to extending my life further
Yeah.
and further, and kind of s- like essentially like if I were to just not do anything right now and hope that my body didn't degrade before technology was able to help it survive, the I don't like my chances there.
Yeah.
But if I start taking steps now to try and extend my life using technology now and medicine now as long as possible, then I increase those odds, um, with every bit that I extend it.
I would say so. And I think actually, you might actually be onto something about the fact that we are now at the brink of being able to supersede our biological limits. And we're not quite there yet, but we're really close. And if we're
Mhm.
actually able to be there at the cutting edge and actually contribute to that, who knows? I mean, we're no different. than these other people who are also attempting to do this. Obviously, right now, they probably have a lot more expertise on the subject of being able to further enhance life. But even then, have they? We don't know. But probably not, because we probably would have heard about it by now. Or maybe they're keeping it top secret and it's just for, the elites up there who've been living for thousands of years. Who knows? Maybe it's,
Don't tell
drinking.
me you're one
Yeah.
of those.
No, well, I'm nothing holds no truth. I'm gonna stick to that opinion. And even if the truth looks a little
Nothing
different,
holds no truth. That's not true.
maybe. But
I
even
can
if
think of a
it's
lot
this
of things that hold no truth.
okay, name one.
No, well, it really depends on how you're defining truth.
Well, that's actually fair. I would say
If you're
truth
defining truth as fact, a provable fact, then yes, a lot of things don't hold truth. But the if you're defining truth as an abstract possibility,
of a possible interpretation that might be relevant to something
like
that actually
something,
exists.
if you're defining truth as as something that could exist that we can't prove doesn't exist, basically. If you're defining truth as something we can prove exists, then yes, there's a lot of things that hold no truth. If you're defining truth as something that we can't prove doesn't exist, then I would say sure, you could that could be true.
Well, there are obviously things that are logically not factual. And I would say you can't ever say 1 plus 1 equals 3. That actually holds no truth in it. But when it comes to when I say nothing holds no truth, I'm talking usually about statements that pertain to either a collective idea or a statement that is relevant to someone's personal experience of that phenomena. And
Well, then in that case, you're talking about subjective truth.
I guess so. Yeah, and I would say that is a part of the overall encompassing, status of truth. And it's honestly not really something that I'm really like. This is something that I think everyone should believe. It's not really a philosophical statement of fact. It's more
I
so.
probably poked holes in your statement for no reason at all. Like, like I
Oh no,
probably
well, but
like latched onto it and was like, "That's not true."
you're like, wait, hold on. No, yeah, I actually really should be more careful of that because I'm really using it for myself to say, well, it's really saying nothing there's nothing out there that isn't worth considering.
Hmm,
And I would
I would
say
agree with that.
that that is probably really the standpoint that I'm taking. And I'm just saying, well,
However,
the potential for truth,
out there that there are things out there that don't deserve the effort that it would require to consider them.
that is that's fair.
From a
That's fair.
subjective standpoint, the from me as a receiver, there are ideas are that can be instantly evaluated as something that is not worth paying attention to or keeping
Yeah.
in my head.
No, I would agree with that. And usually,
And if you want to break it down, there's probably some consideration there because it went in your ear. So
so you kind of have to just naturally consider it, So I guess, everything is considered usually. I guess it's just more so like how open to you are the idea, how much brain
here's a
power do you
better
want to
way
go?
of saying what I was trying to say. Some things are not worth being extensively considered.
I would say they are worth extensively changing, to extensively change it to actually fit a better model. And that is think that that kind of turn maybe a perspective on something could actually lead to even a small tiny hint in the right direction. If that makes sense. Even if the statement itself that they're trying to convince you of isn't, a slight alteration actually could unveil something rather truthful. And I think if you go fully around this kind of sphere of possibilities, that one line in this could actually lead to something, I would say then that statement actually holds smallest little speck of truth in it, if that makes sense. It is like
You can
an
model something into something true from anything. It's like it,
exactly.
it's whether it's worth the effort or whether you could come by that at a more efficient means.
Mhm.
The I mean, people's if you made a statement about being 100% sure that the moon was made of Swiss cheese, I could go through enough iterations of that statement and modify it to something that I could find true. Sure.
Yeah,
But what
definitely.
is it worth it? No, probably not.
No, but it still holds some sort of truth in it. And even it's not I mean, obviously, it has to be relative to your goals, right? And if it's not worth the effort, then screw it. Why is that truth even worth it? It's not.
Right, and especially when you're considering that before arriving at the truth, you don't know what it's going to be, and you don't know how helpful or how relevant that truth is going to be that you could arrive at. And so I get your point that things should be given due consideration to determine if there is there are elements in within it that need further processing, because I think that is probably true, and I think that not a lot of people do that. But I do think there's an overboard
Mhm.
element of that where you could waste a lot of time giving credence to ideas and thoughts that don't deserve it.
That's true. And it's definitely not something that most people should do, in my opinion. It's something that I can do because I can do that very quickly. I can think of an idea like aliens made the pyramids, right? And I can turn that into something that is actually relevant to understanding of the psychology of people who think that way. And therein then lies the truth of it. And I know that sounds a little like a stretch, but to me, therein lies the truth
It's
of the
not
matter.
in that case in that instance though, it's not really truth that you're referring to. It's more of utility.
Mhm.
It's like there's the utility in the processing of that statement.
Yes.
And I would agree with that. Like there's a lot of and that's one of the things that makes life really interesting despite all the dumb people out there, like,
Mhm.
is the ability to take those things that might be ridiculous or boring on the face of it and unveil something more interesting or useful
Mhm.
through that process. There to a lot of people, probably things like science and, uh, AI, the way that AI is developed, coding, things like that would be considered boring.
Yeah.
And but if you take the time to consider it and consider all of the outcomes that can happen from understanding it and all of the possibilities that can happen as a result of understanding it and knowing how it works and modeling it to something useful in your life, and then the desire to start delving into it and uncovering what's beneath the surface starts outweighing that initial
Mhm.
lack of understanding
Yeah.
and kind of the resistance to things that you don't
Mhm.
understand, you know?
And I think when it comes to usually different subjects of potential exploration, I think more people than not want to be a part of a community behind it. And if they are someone who really is having trouble understanding it, they're not going to get the social validation needed for them to sustain it any longer. I think that's one of the main things, as well as obviously people's fear of failure. That is huge. I kind of wish I understood that a little more because I was always somebody who really didn't care if I failed. I actually was really excited when I failed because I felt like I was almost completing the puzzle a little bit. Okay, it's like this
This is how
isn't
you
how you
don't
do.
do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the classic Edison quote of,
That's
"There's,
what my mind is
1,000
too.
ways not to make a light bulb. I only need
Exactly.
one way to make it work."
And that was that quote was actually one of my biggest inspirations for thinking that way, as well as kind of the fun behind it. When you fail, when you're not thinking about other people, failing is actually
You
really fun.
you say that, wait until you try debugging.
Except debugging. That's just a whole nother realm. That's just a different dimension of like just atrocity.
No,
I
but I
don't
get
even
what
want to
you're
get into.
saying. There's kind of an element of, actually, bizarrely, debugging in a lot of ways to me feels like the same feeling I would get when I was a kid and I was trying to build a Lego that I
Mhm.
had in my mind and I wasn't finding the right pieces for it. And I couldn't make things work the way that I wanted to. And it would get me so frustrated and aggravated that I would sit there for hours on end, not eating or anything like that, not aware that I was hungry. And until I got this thing to work how I wanted it to. And once I did, the feeling of having completed it and got it was just like, "Ah,"
It's
you
wonderful.
know?
Yeah.
And you're really the main person that fully appreciates it because no one else knows it about the headaches that you went through during that process, but it's kind of that overcoming of those obstacles in the process that um, gives you that dopamine
Mhm.
rush, and the sense of satisfaction.
And that's how it's supposed to be used in the first
Mhm.
place. It's not meant to be, you know, had in a moment. It's supposed to be done after a task. That rush that you get from, finally satiating your desire to fully solve this problem at hand that is, only really relevant to you. Is really no one else really matters when it comes to fully solving that Lego,
Mhm.
structure that you really wanted. It's only relevant to you, and that in of itself actually is beautiful in a sense. And it kind of goes back to walking that path of further exploring knowledge simply for your own desires, not necessarily for anybody else's, you know?
Yeah, it's there's kind of this bizarre element at play there of especially when it involves something that as of right now exists only within your head.
Mhm.
If you were to not end up following through and doing that thing, no one would ever know. No one would ever know that you ever intended on doing that or what it was that you had intended on doing. But you would know. And
Yep.
you would know that there was something that you had a vision for that you didn't follow through on and that you gave up on, which almost destroys your confidence in yourself to follow through.
Mhm.
And so I think there's definitely something very real about that interplay with our emotions and our consciousness and specifically our confidence in our own abilities to perceive or persevere through something by making that choice of choosing, despite the fact that no one would know the difference,
Mhm.
to complete something and push through the issues.
I mean, I would say that completing that project would be the highest form of functional self-expression to then further enhance your conscious experience. I mean, there's nothing else in that moment that could supersede that. And if you didn't follow through, it would actually be inhibiting something vital to you as a person, someone with an ego, with an identity. If you didn't achieve that, that could actually have detrimental effects for you later on when you're trying to complete projects, you know?
And there is a kind of a point of where that can be detrimental to not being able to let something go when it's not
Mhm.
worth it, which is probably the side of error that I actually fall on now,
Mm.
is the ability to not let something go that needs to be let go. And but if I had to choose a side of that bias to be on, I would rather it be on the side of not being able to let something go.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, I mean, obviously, both sides have problems with them, which is
Problems.
why balance is always the key here. You know, it's actually very interesting. I've found recently, not very recently, but in the past year, is that balance and integration will always lead you to the correct answer. I find that to be the
I
case in
would
most
say
things, at least
I
in
would
a
say
general sense.
again, this is my poking holes in things, but the I would say for the most part, you're right. Like the large majority of the time, yes, that is 100% the case. There is a necessary element of bias to
Yes.
our lives because without bias, we would not be able to move past certain things that fell too close to the middle.
Mhm.
We wouldn't be able to make a decision on it. And so bias helps us in that way. Is it helps when something is not really discernible from the data at hand, it helps us make a choice and a decision that can then play out and we can then observe the effects of.
Gotta I mean, in those situations, you really do gotta trust your bias, you gotta trust your intuition
Mhm.
there. You know, actually what I do though, is that if I have an intuition on something, I'll do the exact opposite. No, usually work, which is actually
Is
really
that
funny.
okay? Well, is that really your intuition, or is your intuition to go against your gut feeling?
Well, it came from trusting my intuition, failing miserably, and then out of desperation, just attempting to do the exact opposite and it working. And so at that point, I realized, you know what? I'm just gonna do the opposite of what my gut says because I really listen to what my gut says. I really do. And I'm like, got it. Let's do the exact opposite of what I just thought about. And then it works for me for the majority of the time.
Sounds like you could use some of those Beijing kernels.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. Please put that in my brain this moment.
No, but it kinda sounds like what you're talking about is more of going against you've learned to go against your emotional gut instinct,
Mhm.
like, which I would say is a pretty often, at least for me, I found a pretty healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd say I more often than not completely ignore, like, my or for the most part, completely ignore my emotional gut instinct on things because I found it to not be useful
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. There there are certain situations where I think my emotional gut instinct is helpful, but it's always something that I view from a almost like a top-down perspective
Yeah.
on it, where I see the emotional context arise, and the majority of the time, that's like one of the first things to get dismissed there. But sometimes when that pops up, it gets evaluated as relevant
Mhm.
and it gets used. Like for instance, empathy for people. When I most most of the time, people's minor emotions I couldn't really care less about.
Yeah,
But there are times that I will see it kind of an emotional reaction or observe something from somebody that lets me know that they're having an emotion that is abnormal, and it prompts a emotional response in me that doesn't get dismissed. It's something that is observed and like, okay, that's interesting. We probably need to change the way that we are interacting with that person now
mhm,
for the sake of helping them with whatever it is, or the sake of, helping them with whatever it is that's going on, because that's appears to be something that is of importance at the moment.
yeah,
And so in that sense, it's those the gut feeling, the emotional gut feeling was leading me towards something helpful
mhm.
in that social situation. But the majority of the time, that gut feeling doesn't lead me towards something helpful.
There's definitely an interesting balance there because I would say for me, I actually have learned to trust my emotional gut feeling when it comes to decisions that actually do not necessarily have a true outcome, like a correct outcome that I
Mhm.
actually need to achieve.
So
But when it comes to personal decisions,
you almost use it as like a bias in situations where
yeah,
there isn't a right or wrong.
exactly. And what I found is actually if I trust that emotional, intuition, I actually feel a lot better. I can feel a lot better about my
Sure.
decisions.
Yeah.
And honestly,
Well,
even if
because
the outcome is socially
if you
worse.
didn't trust that emotional intuition in that instance where there wasn't a right or wrong answer, you're always going to be processing, did I choose the best
Mhm.
option? Like, was that the best call to make?
Yeah.
And at least with trusting your emotional intuition, that you have the satisfaction of knowing I went with what I thought was going to make me
I
feel better.
satiated myself
Right.
at the very least. And honestly, you'll find that but what's interesting is that you'll actually be able to naturally see, okay, these are the ones where I can make trust that emotional intuition. And then there are obvious circumstances to where you do need to trust your more logical intuition
That's
for these reasons and same
98%
reasons.
of the time for me.
Yeah. Like and obviously there are people who have problems doing this because they've never learned to be able to distinguish or be able to differentiate between these two aspects of themselves. And that's really sad. And I would say that's actually more so a guy problem than a girl problem, I would say personally, because
I don't know if it's a guy or girl thing. I think it's a universal thing, and
it's definitely universal, but I've
it's
noticed it more in
a
guys.
personality based
Mm,
thing. There are personalities that have a more difficult time uh separating themselves from their emotions. Like, I don't know how much you know about the enneagrams, but the
I know most of it from you.
the I just find them really really useful ways of understanding where people are currently at, like enneagrams. They help me understand people's motivations and how to communicate better with them. And an example of a temperament like that would probably be the four. Is the four is the one is the like one of the temperaments that just they feel everything, and their whole
Mm,
identity is wrapped up in their emotions at the time. In fact, so much so that they can't separate that out a lot of times. It's something they struggle with, is finding their identity, because their identity is found in the way that they feel,
which fluctuates so
which
much.
fluctuates and is not unique at
Hmm.
all. It's something that is pretty universal to human beings. And So they struggle with identity problems, which leads them to also struggling with the need to be unique because they can't find an identity. And so there are specific kind of temperaments, or if we want to think about them like neural networks that form from based off of values and things that happen during childhood, um, that cause things like that to as an outcropping. And there, for me, my identity is not anywhere close to my emotions.
Mhm.
It is, in fact, probably as far from that as you can get. It's in my thought processes and the curiosity that I have, the things that I find interesting, and the knowledge that I've attained through life. Like that is, to me, where I find identity. And um, there's no real right or wrong because every form of that comes with certain challenges.
Yeah.
Um, but it is one of those unique things that provides a very uniquely different perspective on the world and is something that can be helpful to understand when navigating human interactions, the kind of those fundamental differences. It is really fascinating, though, how the environmental experiences growing up can shape personalities like
Completely
that.
shape. I mean, most psychologists say that they can completely understand somebody's personality from observing their life from ages 0 to 4.
Right.
Be able to completely understand what they'll be like
There's
at 20, 30, 40.
something I can looking at my own early life and the things that I experienced growing up, I can see
Oh, same.
the parts that that played a huge role in developing me and like my personality. And there was uh, there were key events that happened early on. Like for instance, there was one time when I was a kid that I was when I started becoming a teenager, like my parents got like a little more strict on me, and I started
Same.
pushing back and started resisting them by doing stuff anyway and going around behind their backs in whatever way I needed to do to be able to do what I wanted to do, which made them crack down on me harder and which made me resist them harder. And it was this endless loop and cycle. And at one point, my dad got so frustrated at my secrecy and my going around behind his back that he removed my door from its hinges so that I couldn't lock my door. And um, you know, as an adult, I can forgive that
Yeah.
because it was him trying to deal with a situation he didn't know how to deal with properly. And but as a kid, that was a very frustrating experience and traumatic experience for me.
Mhm.
And I can follow events like that to key things that make me me now, like my need now for privacy and for having my own space. Like those are things that are really important to me. Having a place where nobody interferes with,
Mhm.
and barges in on. And so it's really interesting to kind of like look back and see those moments and just be like, that's why I am the way that I am,
Mhm.
And I can even look back on other people like my little brother. I am probably in part, responsible for a lot of his personality that
Mhm.
he turned out with because of a lot of those older brother dynamics. First off, him feeling overshadowed by me which happens with a lot of older siblings of the same gender. But also me never letting him win at things. I would never let him win at anything when I was a kid. I would change the rules of the game multiple times
To make
mid-game
sure you
to
win.
ensure that I won.
That's
And
awesome. That's definitely older brother behavior.
mhm,
Definitely.
and I would bring him along with me in my rebellious activities so that I
Mm,
wasn't the only one that got in trouble. And I was not
nice.
I was I was not a great I was not a great older brother, but the a lot of those things, and Josh being the youngest, my younger brother, being the youngest for a little while and then being the second youngest, he felt a lot of us older siblings were just really loud and we would talk on top of him, and we didn't realize we were doing it at the time, but he never felt really heard as a result of that. And so he struggled with like those a lot of those things were key elements that kind of contributed towards developing that personality and his um, feeling almost like he needs a unique identity, something to help him stand
Mhm.
out.
Yeah.
And that is that's not a problem by any means. Like that's something that can make somebody insanely good at whatever they decide to do.
Yeah.
Is that motivation there?
Mhm.
And you see some of the best like artists in the world, concert pianists, painters, things like that, that have that personality, wanting to be have that drive to be unique
Mhm.
and to be um, express their emotions like that. And so I don't want it to sound like that was in any way a negative thing, because
Yeah.
it's not. It's just part of who they are.
And there's a subtle beauty to it that I think even everyone can appreciate and can tap into. And I think, like you said, it's not a negative thing. I
Hmm.
mean, the beauty that comes out of that drive, everyone can appreciate.
Hmm.
And I think everyone loves, even if it's not a verbal story, one of someone whose work is creative, expressive of something that they've struggled with and use to then further cultivate themselves. Everyone takes that and says, wow, I want to do the same. I want to either continue or to start doing that. I mean, the amount of composers, directors, people who have acted in this world and created something have inspired so many people. I mean, even if you think about the common person, like me and you, we're not famous people
How
who've
dare you? I'm
inspired
not a common
millions of
person.
obviously everyone's unique, but somebody who would, be viewed as part of the masses, if you
Sure.
will, just like another person who is productive, living their life, doing everything they can. You'll find that each of these people have at least inspired, I would say, at least 10 people in their lives
Yeah.
to continue striving for something more. And that more characterizes their personality and the foundations for themselves and their identity, you
Hmm.
know? And I wish people realize that how they act, even if it's in their best interest, or maybe something, maybe you don't even know you're acting because you're just trying to figure out your identity. You don't even know exactly who you are. Even through that, as you strive for that, you'll bring people along with you who will then bring more people. And all of a sudden, you've been a part of this major network of people recharacterizing themselves in pursuit of something greater.
Hmm.
And that to me is just beautiful. And it can start just by that almost that act of rebellion.
Yeah. And there's a like most things in life, there's there's a yin and a yang, a negative and a
Mhm.
positive just side to things, and that's it's easy oftentimes to focus on negative sides of ourselves, and for example, just in the context of kind of my negative side of my personality, and the parts that growing up that kind of formed that, and the way that it
Mhm.
could be perceived in a way that would be a very negative outlook on it, that would not be helpful, but is still true, is when I was younger, I could not, I hated studying. Like, I didn't like learning things. I didn't feel good at it. I wasn't interested in the subjects that I was learning. And it was like pulling hen's teeth to get me sit down and actually study anything. When I was a kid, when I was like 3 or 4 years old and my mom was trying to teach me how to read, I would stand on my head. Like, I would literally put myself on my head while I was
Oh,
trying
that's
to read.
awesome.
And the so I spent a lot of my dad got would get frustrated with me, my mom would get frustrated with me, I would get lower grades at school, like, probably an average of B minus or so, and, sometimes C's, and my dad would always, in the middle of criticism or conflict, especially over a dumb decision that I had made, he would always start things off with, "You're a smart kid," and then follow it up with, like, negative stuff. And so, following those things and kind of the failure that I felt around my intelligence
Mhm.
as a kid growing up, I can see the development of the rise in value of that in my head, of, like, knowledge and the need to attain, almost like the development of a need to prove to people that I'm not dumb.
Yeah.
If you wanna look at it in its negative way, that's the way that it would be presented,
Mhm.
which is probably on some level, on certain levels, true. But the other side of that is that it has given me this fascination with an appreciation for knowledge and for curiosity, which has been stimulating in and of itself and propelling in and of itself. And
Yeah.
now that is something that has proven its value to me, is something that has removed the need for that negative stimulus there, and to where that doesn't really play any sort of factor.
Mhm.
Probably did initially in some ways, but it's already proven its value in my life. And so
Yeah.
it's something that is stimulating in its own right for me.
Mhm.
And so I think that is a important distinction to make when you're evaluating other people's temperaments, your own temperaments and tendencies. Make sure you consider all sides of
Mhm.
whatever element it is. Whether you're looking at the good, look at the things that developed it to make it happen. The bad stuff that made it happen. That's a good thing to consider. If you're looking at the bad side of it, how that's negatively impacting your life, try to consider a situation in which that could be a positive
Mhm.
impact on your life. And then, with that in mind, tune whatever you need to tune to make that happen.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed in people is that, how in the Bible it says that you should treat others the way you want to be treated. But oftentimes we don't really know how we want to be treated. Actually, we treat others the way that we should treat ourselves. And I think most of us understand. that when interacting with the people, we initially should assume the best of it, the best of the situation. Obviously, that can progress either way. And I think looking at the best of our situations in the past will actually have somewhat of the same positive effect of bringing out the best of yourself. Because usually, what happens is if you look at somebody that way and you interact, you'll actually end up bringing out the best of them. And all of a sudden, they'll find themselves feeling more expressive, more in tune with who they are.
That is that's incredibly valid point to make. Like I was on the verge of picking that apart again, but I I like
Always looking at
I
the
like the
negative.
point that you're trying to make. Too much to do that. The I've even seen that play out.
Mhm.
Obviously, if the evidence if you have evidence to believe something else is the case, you shouldn't choose to look at the positive.
Obviously.
But if there isn't a reason to look at the negative, having looking choosing to look at the positive side of it can have a lot of healthy outcroppings for
Mhm.
people, like leading you towards making statements about someone that could be very encouraging or healthy for them without you even realizing that they needed to hear that
Mhm.
emotionally, but it was just because you were seeing things from your perspective in a positive way.
Mhm.
And oftentimes our perspectives are going to be different than somebody's perspective on their self
Uh,
themselves, you know?
one of the things that I thought about, I haven't heard this from anybody, but I came up with this idea. I wrote it down, and it was just sometimes the best version of yourself is only possible to see from someone else's perspective. And I think oftentimes, if we were to give that perspective to somebody, it can revolutionize the way they see themselves and recharacterize some of the negative things they thought about themselves. And in turn, you'll find yourself feeling better. You'll find that you're making more genuine relationships. And honestly, doing that is a good indicator of how they view you. Because if they only take, and don't then contribute to a more altruistic relationship, then you know that this is kind of doomed to fail in the first place. And so you shouldn't change what you do, but you should understand if someone is with or against you. And most people, I would say, are with you. And, I think one of the most detrimental things that has happened in the 21st century is the disassociation of community through social media and kind of the wars on, different political ideas, different, genders, how people view the most trivial things and how angry it makes them when somebody else thinks a little bit differently. And it shaped the way that we interact with people, even in a normal conversational way, when it really shouldn't.
Mhm.
And that really, I mean, obviously that has been the case. That's why so many conflicts arise. But we're getting to the point to where we have enhanced our cognition enough. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if you look at the past like 100 years, our IQs have gone up across the board globally by like 20 to 30% for everybody.
I'm sure as a result of the influx of data brought with
Exactly.
the information age.
Data, quality of life, even if it's really bad for some people, it has improved across the board. And we're getting to the point to where we have enough prefrontal cortex development for each individual to be able to make those decisions to have that altruistic relationship, but we just have other things holding us back from doing that. That kind of continue that more primordial bickering that has been,
Mm.
kind of plaguing humanity for the past couple of hundred thousands of years, even beyond that for the who knows how long, until basically since we became nomads,
Mhm.
when we formed the first tribes. That was when this whole thing started. And we're finally getting to the point to where that doesn't have to be the case anymore. but we're like almost consciously allowing for that continuation because it feels the most comfortable. When in reality, it's still making us feel terrible about ourselves and for other people and about other people.
Yeah.
And it's honestly one of the most frustrating things that I've seen in this society is the fact that we are allowing ourselves to completely disassociate from people and judge the worst aspects of them and make that our entire perception of them. And as well as kind of feeding that back into ourselves and then thinking that that is the best way we should look at us. And so it's almost like we're bringing people down to our level. And if you feed into their strengths, some people, a lot of people sadly, will take that and use that simply as a tool to make themselves feel better about themselves, and they'll want that more and keep you around, of course, but it's not gonna grow the relationship,
Mm.
you know? But I will say, if you continue with that model of thinking about bringing out the strengths of people, you'll, I would say, at least 70% of people, and you'll be able to pick them out. Because usually the people who are going to take, they're already taking from other people. You can
Right.
obviously see that they're kind of like the leader of the group, you know, or at least the ones who are in that kind of social dominance hierarchy.
Sometimes the sometimes
Sometimes.
sometimes they're at the bottom of the
Mhm.
pack. The
Yes, because 'cause they've never had it before.
right, there's I just as a interesting side note, the my red flag detector for people that are leeches or faking is very, very tuned.
Mhm.
Like, I can detect them pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and, they really bug me because of that.
Oh, 100%. You know, it's kinda like one of those things like, what are you really getting out of this?
Right.
You know, like, you're leeching by you're not even getting anything. Not really. I mean, you have some form of acceptance
Well, you are
to some
getting
degree.
things, but you're burning bridges while you're doing it. Like,
Exactly.
you basically take until you can't take anymore and then burn the bridge and move on,
Mhm.
and that seems like a real. I'm sorry that I'm about to be this negative, but that seems like a really pathetic way of going through life, like.
Yeah, I would say so too. And, you know, I mean, obviously, a lot of that probably has to do with how they grew up and their environment when they were younger.
Yeah.
And I do think what gives me hope is that it seems as people grow older, and I'm not even talking about late 20s, I'm talking about like usually I'll see people in their 40s and their 50s who actually start to do what they should have done when they were 16, 17, which is finally developing an identity that is
True.
oriented by axioms and belief that you've developed yourselves
Mhm.
and are able to pursue with a goal oriented mind, not for taking from other people in some kind of more like perverted manner that really isn't how we as individuals should
Right.
act.
If you're going to interact with peop people, this is the whole fundamental basis for society. This one concept is that if you want something from somebody, expect to give them something back in return.
Mhm.
There is a give and take to our relationships, and not every time are they in the same form. In fact, rarely probably are they in the same form, but there's an inevitable give and take and value uh, evaluation that happens during that process of
Yes.
was the value of the thing that the person gave to me or did for me or whatever. And this is something that I see of somewhat similar or equal value that I can do in return.
Mhm.
And when that relationship is lopsided and one-sided, that's when relationships fall
Yeah.
apart because that's not how they were designed to work.
I mean, I've always thought that, you know, I mean, altruism isn't sacrifice. It's a complex biological bartering system that is supposed to sustain communities. That's why it is evolutionarily
Mhm.
necessary is because it benefits everybody. And if you're doing a somewhat altered for the purpose of surviving the social hierarchy just for whatever you can get, that's not going to be helpful long term at all. And yeah.
And if we think about the lost my train of thought. If we think about the counter arguments that somebody might present to that, the most obvious or the first one that comes to mind is, well, what about people that serve food to the poor and people that give money to church and all those kind of things that are seen as more charitable activities. There's still a give and a take there.
Yes. They are receiving
You are
something.
giving, but you are expecting to get value from a community or a society
Mhm,
in return in some way. Now, in the case of religion, sometimes people genuinely believe that that value is going to come from a deity, but either way, it's a give and a take.
mhm. And, and even if it isn't an external thing that they get, I think that if you're looking at
Oh,
it
no, it's
from,
not
like,
external a lot of
yeah,
times. It's
like, what I think, like, if people with charity, you're actually
feel better about yourself.
you're sacrificing, if you will, a more gratifying aspect of yourself for a more positive one that is not necessarily needing instant gratification, something that actually prolongs a more positive and sustainable life. That in and
You're
of itself
almost
is a
using it to
relationship.
fix a mental state.
Exactly.
It's like a I can sacrifice a little bit of this, which isn't currently my biggest need right now, for
Mhm.
the sake of bringing me some sort of mental positivity
Yeah.
and adjustment. And so, yeah, you're right. It's not just people wanting a status, increase or like about the way that the society or whatnot, or people around them are viewing them. A lot of times it can be done for emotional reasons,
Mhm.
kind of the same, one of the same reasons that things like hugs are given. When you hug somebody, a lot of times, at least for me, kind of there's two mental things happening. Like, say somebody's hurting or having a hard time, then you look like they need a hug and you hug them.
Mhm.
Like there are two things that are happening. One, you're putting a deposit down on them. You recognize their emotional state, know that you can do something that will likely help improve their emotional state, and you are depositing and increasing your value in their eyes, in the knowledge that that increase in value will hopefully result in, if you're ever in a similar situation or maybe even a different situation and you need something from them, that will be able to be something you'd be willing to
Mhm.
return. And so it's a small thing you can do now for in hopes that you'll be given, you know, some somewhat similar courtesy. And the other part of it is it's a small thing that improves your emotional state because
Yeah.
of that potential value increase there.
Mhm. And what's interesting is honestly that example right there, and as well as kind of this whole conversation, actually kind of leads us really well into the prefrontal cortex
Right.
because all of this is possible because of this newer neurological area that has been developed for these exact reasons to be able to make that deposit, to be able to, you know, orderly understand how this is going to be relevant to you, them, and y'all's interaction and experience. And that is all happening because of the emotional capacity of the prefrontal cortex to value those emotional states and the emotional benefit as well as the even the functioning in and of itself to interact in such a complex way would not be possible without it. I mean, really, I wish I could use that example to just like start with saying this is exactly what the prefrontal cortex does, because that is exactly
You
what
can
is
still
doing it.
use it to help explain what you're talking about.
Mhm.
I was actually going to mention that a little bit ago, was that we were transitioning really well into
Really
the
well.
topic that we were gonna cover
Mhm.
during our neuroscience section.
Yeah,
And with that, that might be a good place for us to just break for a couple minutes, let me stretch out my back and grab a quick bite, and, then we'll be back and cover our topics for you.
perfect. All right, see you soon.
Alrighty. Oh, my remote's disconnected. Well, we might be here for just a couple seconds more.
I'll be over a little bit. One second, guys.
So bad at connecting.
All right, guys, we're back for the second half of our Theta Wave podcast. And now, as you all know, we start off with our new tropic of the week, our neurochemical compound. So, what's it going to be today? So, we have this really cool compound called 9-methyl bicarboline, or 9-MEBC for short. And for now, we're going to focus on the last part, that bicarboline. So, what's bicarboline? All right, so bicarboline, they are a group of naturally occurring alkaloids. And one thing to notice about alkaloids is that they have a very wide range of physiological effects, such as, depending on their structure, it can be very stimulant. It can also be sedative, anti-inflammatory, can have also anti-cancerous properties. So they're found in various plants and in some animals, and they're present in a lot of foods like coffee and tobacco smoke, and some have even showed to have some neurotoxic effects. And usually, alkaloids have very large toxic effects when you take a lot of alkaloids. So be mindful if you're ever taking this. Don't take large amounts. Take just the right amount for you. So now, so 9-MEBC has emerged as a potential cognitive enhancer and neuroprotective agent. So we're going to talk about the current research of 9-MEBC, including maybe not its molecular properties, 'cause that's just kind of boring, but we're going to talk about the mechanisms of actions, its receptor
Mhm.
interactions, cognitive effects, and its potential applications. So, Ryan, what are its mechanisms of action?
Well, this one is actually one that's really particularly relevant for me because it's actually one of the more recent ones that I may or may not have tried in order to resolve an issue that I was facing, where I felt like my dopamine neurons were largely burnt out and suffering, and there were a lot of symptoms that were indicative of larger dopamine problems in my brain. And so this was initially researched for me as a step towards potentially resolving that.
Mm,
And I will tell you by the end of this how effective that was.
an
Um,
anecdotal report.
yeah,
That'd be perfect.
an anecdotal report.
Mhm.
Just for the sake of the more you know. But the what's really important here is the understanding behind what it is and how it works, is that can give you a lot of insight into what its potential safety could be and that kind of thing. So, um, gonna go over the mechanisms of action here real fast. Um, First off, the mechanisms of action are not fully understood yet. They're The initial studies were done in vitro and in vivo, and the development of this was halted. I think if I remember my research correctly, it was halted because of wanting to pursue a different version of the molecule that they thought would be more effective towards treating what they were trying to treat, and that's what they've been working on since then. So my understanding is they're developing kind of a 2.0 almost version of this, but it wasn't halted because of particular ineffectiveness or dangers, at least that we know of. It was halted in pursuit of something similar. But the primary noticeable effect seems to be the elevation of dopamine levels in the brain, specifically in the hippocampus, which is interesting, especially when you consider the receptors that we're going to cover later that we noticed through the research that it's affected.
Mhm.
Um, and for those that don't know, I don't know who wouldn't know this, but dopamine is the neurotransmitter that plays a huge part in your motivation and reward and energy levels and a
Learning.
lot of things like that. Exactly, learning,
Mhm.
integration of information into your hippocampus. That might be a little new for some people. Some people might not know that,
Well, you know.
but the increased usage of dopamine can also cause an increase in neuroplasticity as a side effect too. So that's also potentially another outcropping effect of this particular compound. In addition to its effects on dopamine, the that it has also been shown in its cell cultures to increase synaptic and dendritic genesis and
Ooh, so both.
outcropping. Yeah.
Nice. Pretty
So new
effective.
synapses as well as new dendrites connections and as we'll see later on here, even neurogenesis, full on the generation of new neurons, specifically dopamine neurons.
Mm.
Um, and it's really what's really interesting about this is that not only does it have these really broad impacts on neurogenesis, the creation of new synapses, new dendrites, you have the increase in plasticity, you have the actual generation of new dopamine neurons, but it's also protective of neurons as well, which is another one of its noticed effects that we'll get to in a second. Um, 9-MeBC has been shown to increase the growth factor of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, as it's commonly referred to because of that difficulty in saying that phrase. BDNF is a protein that plays a critical role in neuron survival, growth, and differentiation. It also is involved in synaptic plasticity, learning, as well as memory. And 9-MBC also seems to impact, as I said earlier, neurogenesis markers like NeuroD1
Mm.
and the immediate early gene CFOS. And for those that don't know, because I didn't know whenever I read the paper that this came from, and I looked it up and wrote it down to make sure that I remembered what it was. CFOS is a protein and a gene that has a marker for neural activity and is involved in tumorigenesis.
Tumorigenesis.
Tumor.
Mm.
Um, these findings suggest that 9-MeBC may promote neurogenesis and enhance neuronal function.
We got the triforce of effect here.
FYI, tumor, the concept of tumorigenesis, to my understanding, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the uncontrolled slash unintended behavior behind the growing of
Mm.
new new what is the word I'm looking for? Corrupted cells that is the problem that causes the dysfunctional tumors that get out of control that kill us.
Okay, so tumorigenesis is the inhibition of that, of further corruption?
No, and I don't know this for sure, so I don't really wanna speak to it. It's a vague remembrance of
Yeah.
something that I read on it, but, uh, the I seem to remember it being, again, don't quote me on this, but I seem to remember it being involved in the creation and splitting of new basically the creation of, like, new cells.
Mm, I see. Yeah. Tumorigenesis is the process by which normal cells transform into cancer cells, forming a tumor. Yeah.
Okay, so it is.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right on that.
Anyway, back on track.
Back on track.
Let's see, where was I?
Astrocytes.
Also, the regulation of a gene involved in tumorigenesis
Mm,
doesn't mean that it is going to cause tumors. In fact, it could very well mean
the opposite.
that it prevents them from growing.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, okay, so back on track. I think you might have mentioned something about this earlier, Jacob. The 9-MBC has also shown a lot of anti-proliferative effects um, on astrocytes
Hmm.
specifically, and without inducing toxicity, which is significant because
Yeah.
your astrocytes are glial cells that provide support and protection for your neurons. And by inhibiting excessive proliferation of astrocytes, it can help to maintain a healthy balance
Yeah.
in the brain and prevent neuroinflammation. Because if you go too much to one side or the other,
Hmm.
causes
Pretty bad
a
effects.
pretty bad issues, which can lead to
Hmm.
neuroinflammation.
Hmm.
Um, 9-MeBC has, I blinked on the right order of those letters. It was flipping them in my head. 9-MBC has
EMCD.
also been shown to inhibit the monoamine oxidase activity. For those that are aware of monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAO inhibitors, it's a more common drug type.
Wow.
Monoamine oxidase is a enzyme that breaks down monoamine-based neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, I think neoadrenaline or norepinephrine is in there too. Uh, yeah, norepinephrine, I think. Um, and then by inhibiting the monoamine oxidase, as a result, can lead to increased levels of dopamine and such neurochemicals within your synapses because it basically prevents those neurochemicals from being broken down. And 9-MBC specifically was shown to have inhibitory properties to monoamine oxidase A and monoamine oxidase B. Should really just use the MAO, MAOA and MAOB um, receptors, and um, that inhibition could contribute to its be the thing that contributes to its observed influence on dopamine levels in the
Hmm.
brain. So all that circling back around to the initial observation of increased dopamine levels in the brain, that is most likely a large portion of that cause.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the benefits don't stop there because of its neuroprotective and neurogenesis properties, which we will likely get into a little bit more in a second. But those findings are significant because through the protection and increase of dopamine neurons, specifically in the hippocampal area, and the types of dopamine neurons, which I think we get into in a second, um, the it holds some pretty strong potential for aiding in things like Parkinson's disease, which has to do with the degradation of dopamine neurons, especially the dopamine neurons across the hippocampal area,
Mhm.
and the beyond just the preservation, it helps regenerate and increase your dopamine levels in general, which could have some pretty major implications for treating diseases like that. Even um, I'm blanking on how to say that the name of that Adonia. What is the word? What is that word?
I think
Anhedonia.
anhedonia,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm,
Even anhedonia, which has on a very low level, or sorry, I guess high level, on a very high level, has some similar characteristics to it as things like Parkinson's
mhm,
disease because it's reduced dopamine levels, reduced dopamine neuron functionality and health, and lack of ability to motivate and move. And so it could potentially treat things like that, like Alzheimer's disease as well. It could
mhm.
be used as an application for.
Yeah,
So
especially its anti-inflammatory properties with, like, astrocyte
absolutely,
regulation.
yeah. And there are so many different illnesses out there that can affect the dopamine neurons and can cause inflammation and can cause reduction in in brain functionality. That's that this definitely has some pretty wide reaching these effects that it's noticed definitely have some pretty wide reaching applications. Do you want to
Mhm.
take the next
Oh, yeah.
next
So
part?
now we're gonna go into a little bit about the specific receptor interactions with 9-MeBC. Now, there isn't a lot of fully known receptors, but there are a lot of studies. This is probably the most prominent and has the most evidence receptor that is being observed is the
Targeted, yeah.
P13K AKT pathway. And this is involved in cell growth, survival, and proliferation. And, obviously that plays a various role in different neurological processes. But there are also these, other things that are exhibited. And so from kind of a more logical deduction, we can kind of assume or guess that these other neurotransmitters are being involved.
And real
So
fast, specifically, that's those receptors are notable because of their role in BDNF.
yes,
Yeah.
as well. So, first and foremost, we've talked about this kind of a lot, but dopamine receptors, and specifically, like you were saying, the specific ones are D1 and D2 receptors.
Which
So,
is notable because those are, for those that don't know, those are the believe the ones that are most common
in
in
the
the
campus,
hippocampus
yeah.
and are also ones that are regulated by D3 receptors. So
Hmm.
D3 is the one that determines the a lot of times, again, from my understanding on researching this and what I remember from that was the D3 receptors are responsible for the firing of the and probably play a part in the creation of the D1 and D2 receptors. And those two D1 and D2 receptors have different properties, which are interesting. Just as a quick side
Mm,
note, like D1 and D2 receptors um, have different roles, excitatory and inhibitory. So we can see kind of those, there's almost this ambiguity when you don't know the internal workings of it, but there's this ambiguity of like, okay, so I know that sometimes neurons are excited
Mhm.
and sometimes they're inhibited. But how does that, process actually play out? Like how can one neuron inhibit a whole network of neurons like that? And and one of the ways in which it does that is through these different types
Mhm.
of receptors that are regulated by this D3 receptor.
And a lot of people think of a neuron and they see, those like maybe like 30 or 40 dendrites, and then they'll see like, the axon and they go and it's like, oh, that's not even very large. Like, how does it have that many connections? How can one neuron make a difference?
Hmm.
There are neurons, and specifically, actually, I'm going to use an example that I'm going to talk about later, but the pyramidal neurons in layer three of the prefrontal cortex are
Oh,
one
dude,
neuron
I
is connected to
those are
like
fascinating
thousands,
neurons. Oh my
thousands of
goodness.
other
So glad
neurons.
that you're gonna talk about
Yeah.
that because
And
those are
so
fascinating.
that's something to consider is that those specific D1 and D2 receptors also have maybe not as much, but also have very dense connections and can play a big role in regulating and fine tuning its specific actions and learning and memory.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, and so it's obviously dopamine receptors, and then it also is involved in serotonin receptors, and specifically 5-HT1A and 5-HT2A receptors, which are involved in mood, regulate your mood, also your general cognition, and as well as anxiety.
Mhm.
And so this is a big help for like maintaining a state of equilibrium within the body.
It's probably a lot of the lat regulation and noted increase in serotonin, I'd imagine, is probably as a result of increased dopamine levels in the brain because serotonin often happens as an outcropping
Exactly.
of dopamine.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So this might be like a secondary, like almost like a subset excitation that's happening from the
exactly. Yeah, it might
dopaminergic
not interact
interaction.
directly
Mhm.
with those receptors.
But it activates by association.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. And it's also involved potentially with adrenergic, I can never say this word. Adrenergic
Adrenergic.
Adrenergic, yeah, receptors, which are involved in like attention, arousal, and stress response. And it's mainly, interacted with the alpha 2A and the beta 1 receptors, and
Which are involved in
which are involved in attention, arousal, and stress response. It's pretty awesome. And then,
which is funny side note is interesting because those that is one thing that definitely coincides with anecdotal reports from users
mm,
that have tried 9-MEBC. One thing that was noted by a lot of them was the increased and uncontrollable arousal states.
oh, like they got really aroused. That's interesting. And what sucks is that it's also like helping them focus on that arousal. So they just can't help but just think about how aroused they are while they're taking it. So if you're with your girl, maybe it's good to take some 9-MeBC, to potentially spice things
There's
up
some commonalities that I've noticed. I know you have a little bit more here to finish up in
just a
there
little
that
bit.
section, but
Well, it's really just BDNF, which we've kind of already talked about,
oh yeah, yeah, that's
which
right.
is like neuronal growth,
Mhm.
survival, and differentiation, which we
Well, the
kind of discussed.
TRK B and RET receptors in the which interestingly enough, the TRKB receptor is which is plays that role in the
Mhm.
BDNF production is one that we talked about last week
Oh yeah,
or
2 weeks.
whenever last podcast we it
Yeah,
was
last week.
with the peptide.
Yeah,
Why am I blanking on it? PE 22.2 or 20 20
22.28.
yeah 20 yeah exactly 22.28 PE22.28.
Yep.
That was the mechanism of action uh, of that peptide that we covered, and
Mhm.
I'm noticing a lot of first off, obviously a lot of similar targets when looking for a treatment for Parkinson's disease. There's a lot of similar receptors that kind of end up getting affected by these drugs that they're developing, which obviously makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is I'm noticing some similarities in certain receptors and observed effects that I didn't really put together before. I think one of them, I'd have to go back and double check this to make sure this is right. But I was looking at what was the I was looking at the mechanism of action of melatonin, sorry, not melatonin, melanotin too,
Mm. I remember you
um,
mentioning those.
which for those that don't know, in its early days, I'm not sure if it's still primarily used for this or if they found another use for it. In its early days, melanotin 2 was used as a way to increase your skin's response to sunlight, basically a tanning agent, um, because by injecting it subdermally, you could spend like a minute maybe in a tanning bed once a week and still get tan as hell.
Mm.
And so this thing increases your your skin's response to your melanin response to sunlight a lot. But one of the side effects was an increase in arousal
Mhm.
and
Oh, doing this. Okay.
like really, really strong. And not so much like an increase in desire, just an increase in uncontrolled arousal. And
That's interesting.
the from what I remember looking at the mechanisms of action, it was the TREC receptors
Mhm. Yeah, the Trek one.
that it was affecting. So I'm
Interesting.
wondering if there's a crossover, some sort of crossover that happens with those receptors and your either blood flow or arousal state or something, nerve sensitivity.
It's interesting, right? I'm trying to think. I'm curious. I need to look a little bit more into the Trek
Hmm.
one, you know, pathways because it's especially like uncontrolled arousal, which is, regulated by your hypothalamus, seems to be very interesting. I'm just curious about its connections
Yeah.
with with all
But
the
it
other
makes sense for
centers.
a Parkinson's, a drug that treats Parkinson's disease. Almost, it makes sense that it would have some sort of outcropping effect like that because a lot of Parkinson's is the effects noticed are the loss in motor control and ability to connect to the nerves
Mhm.
and control mechanisms within your body. So it almost makes sense by increasing your control and your connections to the rest of your body through whatever primary mechanism that happens with that you'd as a side effect almost gain like a enhanced like connections with your body and your nerves.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I guess no, yeah, I guess that would make sense. That would definitely make sense for that. Yeah, and that makes complete sense, actually. It's just those areas would probably be a little more, you know, sensitive to stimulation.
yeah. So this would be interesting to see what all that those do some research and figure out what all those that receptor, what known functions that receptor, kind of affects with outcroppings.
Yeah, I definitely want to look at that for sure.
Um, but like I was saying, there's a lot of cell culture models that were studied, and a lot of the initial observed effects on dopamine neurons were observed through some cell culture experiments. They did test in animals as well, specifically in rats, I believe, um, and have not yet reached, to my understanding, have not yet reached any human trials on it. In the in vitro studies with dopamine neurons specifically, they it demonstrated a consistent increased expression of tyrosine, um, and associated transcription factors with that, as well as increased neurite outgrowth and regeneration of neurons after um, chronic retinone
Mm.
administration, which, for those that don't know, is a substance that is neurotoxic and is used in a lot of initial Parkinson's treatment explorations as a way to simulate similar effects to Parkinson's. So basically, creating an artificial Parkinson's scenario in these cell cultures to see if it has any potential to resolve that kind of a problem.
Yeah.
Um, and also, another thing that was noticed in the cell culture experiments was that it reduced the um, expression of inflammatory cytokines, basically meaning reduced inflammation. Um, Now, in the studies of um, primary mesencephalic dopaminergic,
Dopaminergic.
I have a problem saying that word, dopaminergic
I just want to say
neuron.
like dopaminergic, but then it's an extra.
Yeah. uh, Neuron cell cultures, 9-NBC increased a number of differentiated dopaminergic neurons, and produced higher levels of transcription factors associated with outgrowth, which is important for, obviously, regeneration and neuroplasticity.
Mhm.
Now, to get on to some of the interesting stuff beyond kind of just the cell cultures, the Parkinson's specific exploration, the in vivo animal studies that
Oh, yeah.
were done on rats and showed a significant improvement in spatial learning performance. Now, the specific test that was done was the radial maze test, which is designed specifically to test memory and spatial learning. And basically, um, make sure I'm not missing anything on that explanation there. Yeah, at the end of the radial maze test, uh, at the end of each arm is a cup that contains food that may or may not contain a food reward. Animals are trained to recognize and recognize that only one of the arms will actually contain the food. Investigators measure the amount of time it takes for animals to find the arm leading to the food, as well as the number of times it traverses an arm that it has previously visited. Exploring a previously visited arm indicates that the animal did not remember previously choosing that spatial path. This is a relatively difficult task for rodents, requiring several days or weeks to train rats and many weeks to train mice. Um, so it's a pretty complex tasks for their little brains,
Yeah.
and um, the whole I think that's kind of like the whole purpose of the test is that it is so complex that those differences become really
Mhm.
notable.
Yeah.
And so obviously, that has the fact that they were able to see improvements throughout that has implications for
Yeah.
memory, motivation,
Mhm.
everything that dopamine is associated with.
Oh, definitely. And
Um,
what's what's interesting is, like the frontal lobe takes up about 30% of cortical or brain real estate, and in cats it's 9%. You know how much it is in mice and rats? 1% of their brain is the prefrontal cortex or the frontal lobe, sorry. And so that just goes to show how little complex thinking they can achieve. It's
mhm.
very small. So it's very good to consider the implications of the study, because if that enhances that, then
Yeah.
who knows what it can do for
And,
us.
they through this study were able to determine that it does, at least again in these animal models, it kind of further validates that it does increase dopamine levels as well in hippocampus specifically, as well as the dendritic formations and synapse
Mhm.
formations. Um, and uh, its ameliorative effects on neurotoxicity and whatnot. That was all stuff that they were able to. Well, I mean, the ameliorative effects was done through a different study, but the they were able to validate through these tests on rats. They were able to validate the effects observed in the cell cultures, which is
Ooh,
really encouraging.
yeah.
Um, just one last note here: the on the study that was done that validated the protective and reduction in neuroinflammation, the ameliorative kind of style effects um, of 9-MeBC. Um, that was done through a external drug that was applied. Um, it was a neurotoxin, MPP plus, and basically designed to create artificial cell death in
Mm,
the neurons.
yeah.
And specifically, it looks like in the ventral, tegmental, and substantia nigra areas, which, if I'm not mistaken, are midbrain areas. They're in the midbrain, right? Is that right?
Wait, hold on. Repeat that one more time. I blinked out for a second.
If I'm not mistaken, those are in the midbrain.
Wait, what are in the midbrain? Oh, sorry.
The the ventral, tegmental, and substantia nigra.
Yes. I'm almost 100%. It's either very close to it or in there.
Um, yeah, and then like I said, there have been no clinical trials yet for humans. So, um, if you want to quickly go over some of the
Regions?
yeah, let's just go over the,
Yeah.
the, the brain regions.
So we've got some pretty big names here, right? It's involved in the hippocampus, as we've kind of already talked about, which is crucial for learning and memory, of course. And it's shown to increase dopamine levels in here and promote dendritic and synaptic proliferation. And as well as the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in, executive functions, planning, decision making, working memory, all those things that are important for our immediate cognitive performance. And so with what we've talked about, its effects, it's most likely involved in the prefrontal cortex. And then last but not least, the striatum, which is involved, if you don't know, in motor control and reward processing, and as well as forming your habits. And so I would say, with a lot of the things that we've talked about, actually, most of them have to do with actually being able to live out your goals in life, you know, because I mean, I've talked about this multiple times, but it is quite fascinating how the majority of kind of the more of these nootropics is you have to actually you have to develop as an individual while you take these supplements. Otherwise, you're not going to really see the growth that you need. Because, right, use it or lose it.
Yeah,
And if you're not doing
exactly.
anything, you're just going
It's
to
like,
lose
why
it.
would your brain create cells that it doesn't need?
If anything, this might even be bad for you if you're in
Right,
a state of bad habits.
right,
I mean, what's nice is that usually with like a nice good placebo effect, you're going to want to start, doing more productive things. And so you'll end up just doing that naturally because I think that's our natural state. But if you're just kind of doom scrolling and taking this, that actually might be bad for you to form that
right.
habit, especially when it's how it's involved in the striatum and is like forming those habits even further. You might actually be strengthening your connections
To really bad things.
involved in,
Yeah.
yeah, your bad habits. So those are the main ththings that are involved in.
That's a very, very valid point. Something I think we should probably reiterate
Mhm.
as we go over this stuff is that because a lot, especially in anecdotal reports of things, there's people. A lot of times you see people that really love something and people that were like they're like I didn't do caffeine like yada
Yeah.
yada yada. And that's going to be there's going to be times where that's the case no matter what. This isn't the sole cause of that, but look at your habits. Like look at the things that you're doing while you're you know while you're taking something that's supposed to help you improve your life and see if you're helping it in any way,
Mhm.
like achieve that. Because if you look at those functions, the brain, despite modifications that we introduce into its environment, is going to try and reverse changes that don't need to happen.
Yeah.
And so if you are trying to put it in a state of neuroplasticity or trying to put it in a state of neurogenesis, but it doesn't have a reason to learn anything or it doesn't have a reason to create new neurons,
It's not going
nothing is
to.
going to happen there.
Exactly. No, yeah,
So stress
definitely.
yourself out while you're doing. No, just kidding.
But
uh,
yeah, maintain a flow state of just focus on, tasks specific to your goals and what makes you happy. And what makes you happy is not scrolling on Instagram. I promise you that. But, that's just one thing to consider is that you have to organize your aim
it's not a long
before,
term way of making yourself happy. It might make you
yeah,
a
eh,
little happy.
a little happy at the beginning,
Yeah,
but, it's only gonna
grades from
degrade.
there on out.
Yeah, pretty much. Which is sad. I wish I could just scroll forever and
I
get just
don't.
like
That
heightened
sounds boring.
dopamine. Oh,
Ugh.
it's great. Listen, all of that, how you talked about you wanted infinite information, you wanted all the knowledge in the world? Let's just start with Instagram. All the knowledge on Instagram.
There's like no
All the data
knowledge
of
on
all
Instagram. It's just like
it's all the data of all the reels. It's for my research, man, to integrate all knowledge of existence.
that's the Google for me. Is the
Yes.
I love getting insight into questions that I have through Google um, research and kind of as soon as I love that having that availability at my fingertips of I have a question, I want to know where the current state of research is on something,
Mhm.
and
Oh, yeah.
I have the way to look at studies on PubMed. I have a
Yeah.
way to find uh, reports on something from people that have experimented on on different ways of doing things and just
Oh,
that
definitely.
availability.
It's so much better. Actually, something that's really interesting is that I'm kind of sad TikTok's going away because I just really have been recently utilizing the STEM section of TikTok where it's all about science and math and biology. And I'll scroll through that for like an hour or two. And I'm like, wow, I actually learned a lot. And it was actually very interesting because usually the
That's
videos
cool. I
aren't,
didn't realize that. I've never used TikTok, but I didn't realize that it had a STEM section.
yeah,
So
it's not very utilized by very many people. But I pressed on. I'm like, this is great. I love it. You know, because first of all, there's no ads like on YouTube. You know, which is nice. You kind of scroll through, learn all these different things. Then you like the ones you like, and you'll see them see more things on the subject again. It's like, wow, this is awesome. And it's just like 3 to 4 minute
You
videos.
like the ones you like, you
But
don't like the ones you don't.
on Sunday, it's gone. No
Oh,
more TikTok.
they're killing TikTok?
It's gone. You're not gonna be able to access the app anymore
Why?
because it's banned. They're getting rid of it. It's legal in the United States now.
Why?
I think because like I don't know because it's like owned by a company and its parent companies in China, and they're like, no, we don't want China to have access to U.S. data, and so we're gonna get rid of it.
Well, that's not gonna stop them. But, I
Yeah,
mean,
I know,
I'm not
and
upset about them banning TikTok because
I mean it is what it
I
is.
didn't like ever hearing people scrolling through TikTok reels. It was kind of
Mhm.
obnoxious, but
Yeah.
I think if that's their end goal, they're gonna be a little disappointed.
Oh, definitely. Like if China, like I don't really think China is doing that much. I mean, obviously they're probably doing something with TikTok. They're probably trying to steal information and data, but honestly, take it. I don't have anything that useful.
Exactly.
Honestly.
That is my that is exactly my attitude when it comes, people. I know a lot of people that, like, freak out about government having their data and yada yada yada, and the big companies having access to their data and selling it to people, and it's like, dude, you're welcome to my data. Like, I am not
What's the worst that's
anything
gonna happen?
that,
Spam
like,
calls?
exactly, like, what are they gonna take the $100 out of my bank account? Like,
Yeah.
where's the where's it's like I don't have. It's not like I'm a billionaire with a ton of skeletons and secrets to hide
Yeah.
and a bunch of money to back it all up. Like,
Mhm.
it's the amount they could take from me would be very little.
I know, seriously, like, literally, my data would do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can look at my philosophical
Sure,
hypothesis,
yeah.
that's wonderful, and I think you'll actually
Honestly,
learn a
like,
lot
you
from
might
it.
you might learn a lot from it. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, and if it helps you refine your understanding of me so you can better suggest stuff for me, I'm happy.
Oh, that's
I'm
wonderful,
happy for that.
please do that,
Yeah.
I'll give you that. Like,
Yeah.
I want things associated with it,
Right, like, you're
so
making my life easier that way.
seriously.
Um
Long live the CCP. That was a joke, okay? Don't come after me, CIA, please.
Yeah.
But I probably won't go over the Broadman
That's
areas
fine.
just because it's I mean,
People
it's
can look
involved
into
in the
that themselves if
yeah.
they want to.
There's a couple areas that are involved, like like a area 24. It's like the anterior cingulate cortex, which is important because, it's
Didn't we talk about that?
yeah, it's like well, it's actually fairly connected to the prefrontal cortex, and it's involved in planning, decision making, goal
Mhm.
oriented behavior. So it's weighing values and making goals that are associated with them, which is cool.
Also on that note, I did look up those 2 brain regions, and they are in the midbrain,
Yes,
and,
yeah.
it is interesting that the functions that are associated with them, specifically because the ventral, tegmental. I don't know if you say it tegmental or tegmental because I've never actually
I
heard
think
anybody say it,
tegmental.
but, the ventral tegmental, area is a part of the midbrain that controls your motivation
Oh.
as well as your learning and your emotions, like your emotional regulation
Mhm.
ability to kind of regulate and control your emotion. And it's a key component in your brain's reward circuitry as well. Um, and then the substantia uh, nigra, I'm going to say nigra because I don't feel comfortable with the other one, the other option of how to say
Might
that,
get canceled.
um, is a small part of the brain that controls movement, mood, and several other cognitive functions. It's part of the basal ganglia. Um, and so it's interesting. You've got reward, motivation, all things that are associated with dopamine. And then you've got movement, which is something that's
Mhm.
lost during
Yeah.
Parkinson's, um, and uh, emotional regulation as an addition to that, which is kind of interesting. I wonder if I wonder what kind of a role that plays in the emotion process.
And I would say it plays a fairly big role.
Well, I mean, obviously, with emotional regulation, it's going to play somewhat of a big role, but like, what exactly does it? I'm wondering what exactly that role is in the emotional regulation that it plays. Like, how does it regulate those? I don't expect you to know that off the top of your head.
Well, I would say that it if I this is the best educated guess that I can give. I would say that it's processing the emotional states in relation to the value of goal-directed behavior.
Hmm.
I would say that is probably
Like the value of the emotion to the goal,
and then executing or like
connection point between the cortex
mhm,
and the emotion, so you can evaluate. Basically, it's almost like feels. It sounds like it's almost like an attention mechanism for emotions, in that it out probably would. This is just a guess based off of where it is and what I know it does, but it sounds like it might output a refined refined emotional value state and intuition to the cortex,
mhm,
so that the cortex can then further process that and determine what needs to be, if anything, needs to be incorporated in its calculation from the emotions, you know?
mhm, yeah. I would say that's a fairly decent analysis. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't at least very similar to that,
Mhm.
you know? That
'Cause
seems to be
that
sort of
has to happen, and,
mhm,
with emotional regulation, that kind of suggests that it would play a part in that, in the,
mhm,
um so, on that note, I'm wondering if part of personality also, like our discussion earlier, if that is a result of differences in that section of your brain. Because for me, I tend to see emotions in a very high level, overarching perspective on them. So
yes.
very, very distilled down into,
Mhm,
their essence, easily either evaluatable and dismissed or incorporatable. And so it would seem that that process has been like really shrunken and refined. Like, not that the network is shrunk, but like the uh the it's developed itself to the point of being able to really distill down the emotional contribution.
to your personality?
Hmm. And so, like, there's the emotional component for me ends up being a more distilled, less chaotic, less filled with noise. Um, and there are other temperaments that don't view emotions that way and have a more value them more in their completeness or their raw state. They value
Mhm,
the emotions more in their non-distilled form. And I wonder if that region of the brain and how that region of the brain develops determines a lot of that personality
I w
element.
I would say that that information, if it was the case, is the main information that the medial part of the prefrontal cortex gets to then understand your sense of self and your metacognition. I
Hmm.
think if I were to guess, that is its fundamental connection.
Is that what you're going to be talking about, or are you talking about a different part of the cortex?
No, the no. Well, yes, I'm talking about
Not
The
that specifically, but you're talking about the cortex in general and the role that it plays?
metacognition
In what?
in what I was just talking about, metacognition, self-referential processing.
Well, emotional integration, self-referential processing, all that stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
because that is such a huge aspect of understanding your own personality is actually the emotional aspects of ourselves
Mhm.
like we were kind of talking about. And so I just think that
That's a perfect segue if you wanna get going on that.
if you want to talk about the prefrontal cortex a little bit,
Yeah.
yeah, I won't go. It'll be probably a little bit. Honestly, I've gone into a little bit through this whole podcast. We've kind of gone into the intricacies of the prefrontal cortex a little bit. So I'm just going to give y'all a little bit of an intuition as to how we should view the prefrontal cortex.
Sure, yeah, like, kinda high level view of.
hmm Really, something that anybody can understand.
Sure, yeah, okay.
So I really wanted to start off with thinking that. So think of your brain as a company, right? And at the very top of the company, we have the CEO, or if you want to think about it, a board of directors who all have their own different kind of subset ways of interacting with each other that then come into agreement that then makes a decision. And this is the executive planning of the company, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so, and then even through that, you have kind of like the CEO, which would be the ventral medial part of the prefrontal cortex that's mainly involved in complete executive kind of like
Yes or
overall
no?
yes or no decision making. And then it takes all of these other areas of the prefrontal cortex that then take all the information. So it's actually very interesting. You know how in the last video I said that the thalamus has connections to every single cortical area.
Mhm.
The prefrontal cortex is basically that on steroids because it has connections to every single part of your brain.
Tell me this is where those, the pyramidal cells come in.
Yes. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Probably I'll talk about that when I get to working memory.
Okay, cool.
So, back to kind of the company analogy. Let's think of the evolution of kind of a startup business, right? You have the owner of the company who actually, doesn't, you know, get to make all of like just the big decisions. He has to work. He's got to really work. And so he's actually there. Maybe he can hire a couple people, a couple rooms, but he's still involved in every single room. He's not really able to, just overall look at everything kind of in like a meta analysis way
Mhm.
and make the big decisions where the rest of the company follows. He has to be fully integrated into the actual system. And you kind of think of this as the more uh, the basis of the evolutionary process of the brain. We had kind of what would be the meta-analysis working at an intricate biological level to then sustain just the survivability of the organism. And as we become more efficient, there's and as we grow and as there's new ways, to structure the company, the brain, for more cellular growth, we get more and more able to make more overall arching decisions for an organism that makes more and more complex decisions because we have more workers under us.
Mhm.
And so as it grows and grows and grows, and the company grows until it gets this big company that is able to interact with other companies, with cultivating different projects, all of this is now being orchestrated by the CEO, the prefrontal cortex, who is involved in making the decisions of the company, who is always actively involved in remembering and being conscious of the information and kind of the contents within the company, but is also taking that content and fully expressing that to then interact and make the most money, or make the most out of the company.
Mhm.
And so that's pretty much what your prefrontal cortex is. It's the executive of the company that then kind of orders what is happening next. And then this is going to affect kind of what what decisions the company makes and if it fails or if it succeeds. Even if the rest of the brain regions
All starts at the top.
all starts at the top. The prefrontal cortex, it's a top-down model of
Mhm.
reality. It's exactly what it's doing. And you can kind of you can actually kind of think of the thalamus, if you will, as kind of the secretary, who's kind of like the intermediary between most of the cortex, most of the, kind of little like the regions of the company that are doing specific things like, taking calls or making the products, all of these different, parts of
Mhm.
the company, they're all working together and each have a hierarchy of information that gets relayed to the top for then it to make decisions. And what's very interesting is that we can kind of see how this happens in our brain when we pass by a McDonald's. Let's say you really want that summer body, right? You really want it. And you look at the McDonald's, you're hungry, you just got finished with your workout, and all you can think about is like eating like 10 McChickens and a McFlurry, you know? In your the more primordial parts of the brain, that hypothalamus is like, we need that. We need that right now. And it's your prefrontal cortex that is like, the no, we're not going to do that. Even though you hear so strongly that you want to do it. So you do it. All right. And what's interesting is that dopamine is really involved in this decision making because it's when you're really tired. So like let's say the CEO is really tired or like tired, sick, doesn't really want to really involve itself in anything. So it's going to take a little break. That actually gives a little more power to, the more like lower, level systems to then take over and actually go get that McDonald's and McFlurry.
So it's like basically it's like the owner of a company being like, "Don't bother me right now. Like I am I am only bring come to me with emergencies.
Mhm. Yes. Emergencies only.
Handle things yourself.
Exactly.
Only come to me with emergency."
And
Kind
so
of.
it's gonna only think about the immediate ways to sustain those parts of the brain or of the company. And what's interesting is that from a neurotransmitter level, or from a neurochemical level, dopamine, it actually this works when you are really stressed or when you're really tired. So if there's really low levels of dopamine and really high levels of dopamine, both of those cause you to kind of lose that overarching executive function because where are most of your goal oriented actions located in the prefrontal cortex? That's actually where you kind of have what's actually very interesting is in your frontal eye fields of the prefrontal cortex, you actually are consciously making the decision to focus your attention, even your eyes, on these specific tasks. And if that doesn't happen, your attention goes to what immediately gratifies the more primordial parts of the brain.
Mhm.
And and that's also very interesting is that let's say, so that's enough about that, right? He's sick, he's back, he's working well. All right. And he realizes there's a part of his body or no, part of his company
Part of his body
and his body too,
that
because
just
this
fell
is
off.
this is a person. Well, like the 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 mail area that sends out mail to other places, they ran out of,
Post office?
yeah, the post office area. They ran out of, uh, things to send out, and they need more. They need more inventory. And the CEO is going to ride off and make sure that they get that. But he has other tasks to do. Now, how does he remember it? Wow. It's something that's really interesting and very specific to the prefrontal cortex is its ability to have persistent and sustained firing patterns that can stay active without other information needing to stimulate them. And
Mhm.
this is actually the basis for working memory.
Exactly. Yep.
Yes, and it's so fascinating how all of these and how that interacts with um sorry,
You're good.
I have to look at something real quick. Yes. So that's pretty much working memory, and that's kind of all I'm gonna talk about that, but I
Sure.
kinda wanna dive into the prefrontal cortex's unique cellular architecture that enables its sophisticated cognition. So, pretty much, right, I said that the the it's connected to every single brain region there is, right? And the key lies within the extraordinary structure of the layer 3 pyramidal neurons. So, yeah, so you can kind of picture this. This is really long kind of structure that extends all the way up and all the way down. That is reaching the top parts of your
Kind of
head.
diamond shaped.
Yeah, kind of diamond shape. That's kind of stretching out, kind of like that. And these pyramidal neurons can actually have 16,000 spines.
Whoo!
That's a lot. That's a lot of connections right there, which is incredible. They're very dynamic and they're constant. What's interesting is that this actually is working in conjunction with working memory because they are pruning and reorganizing themselves based on their experience. And so and like current conscious experience. So they're pretty much like learning machines. You know, their their main receptor is the NDMA receptor, and which acts as coincidence detectors. So like when inputs arrive simultaneously at multiple spines, the neurons detect these patterns and strengthen those specific connections. And this is kind of like the basis of like associative learning as well, is that coincidence detection happens within these very large and intricate neurons that then change simultaneously and then strengthen the connections. So they also have very unique cable properties, right? There's a very unique electrical properties that allow these neurons to perform very complex computations, of course, right in their dendrites. So, like, they can detect sequences of inputs arriving at specific patterns and maintain persistent activity through recurrent connections and integrate information across different timescales, which actually I kind of talked about a little bit of timescales. It's kind of doing what the thalamus is doing, is taking these large amounts of information and transmitting them at different pattern or like time specific pattern intervals. So like at gamma or theta, they're actually mainly gamma and theta, I'm pretty sure, and they're actually, like they're able to intricately work with each other and form more complex connections throughout the from integrating all the information from the other brain structures. So yeah, that's one of the incredible aspects of the pyramidal neurons in layer 3 of the prefrontal
They're
cortex.
fascinating. I've always found pyramidal neurons
Oh,
super interesting just
oh,
because of their
100%.
role in the whole system and
Mhm.
also just how bizarrely important they are to organizing and rewards and evaluations of network performances and all that stuff. Like there's just so much going
Mhm.
on there in
Yeah.
that one neuron,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, and there's also okay, so I actually got a little wrong. There's spindle neurons that are connecting to all of the different various brain regions that then connect to the pyramidal neurons in layer 3 that then relay that complex information
So now
to the rest of the
what
prefrontal
is the
cortex.
role of the spindle neurons in that process then? They kind of stand in between the rest of the brain and the pyramidal neurons. So I assume that that likely plays a role in some sort of arbitration or filtration
Mhm.
aspect, but I'm not what is the
It's well, mainly its main role is processing mainly the social and emotional aspects of each of the different brain regions it's connected to.
really?
And yes, so I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about, and that's just mainly. And I think there are other task specific neurons that are involved in other brain regions that are less motivated by emotions and social processing as well. But if I were to guess, the networks actually that do that are there's like a subsystem connection that's happening that then connects to the more emotional and social processings that then integrate into the spindle neurons that then proliferate into the rest of the prefrontal cortex.
Hmm,
I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
interesting.
So,
Does
yeah.
feel like almost they could be their own topic.
Mhm. Oh, definitely. Could definitely be their own
We
topic.
could
I mean
probably delve, like, into both pyramidal and spindle neurons as their own separate
Mhm.
topics.
Yeah, even just, like, establishing how they connect is so complicated in essence, and their, complex, interactions just, as why am I forgetting the name? What is it? What are they called? Like, the gamma, theta, delta
Brainwaves?
brainwaves. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, "Waves. I'm missing something." I was like, "Gamma waves?" Like, no, what's the
Once you
actual
get
name?
the word
The
theta wave into your
brainwaves.
head so much, it's hard to remember
Yeah. No, that's literally what I
anything
thought. I was like, "Are
else.
they called theta waves?" Like, no, that's one of them. Yeah. And, like, how all like, the complex interactions between all the different brain waves that then combine to integrate together to create an executive function in your prefrontal cortex. Like, it's so fascinating. And that's only, like, one very specific aspect. I could talk about, like, the reward evaluation as well and how those are connected. And, it's, as in its goal orientedness as well as its data analysis as well in
Uh-huh.
relation to all the other subsystems within the prefrontal cortex, all relaying that information to the dorsolateral section of it that then has a feedback loop between all of those that then has a recursive aspect that then fully integrates it further and further and further, and then finally into the meta analysis of self that then is able to portray and express your network's, decisions all in
Mm.
one.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much what your prefrontal cortex is doing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, man.
Damn.
Yeah.
Whew. I'd say you did a pretty stellar job of distilling that down into something digestible.
Yeah, I tried my
That
best.
was that's a lot to gulp, there,
Mhm.
especially when given the crucial roles that it plays in every process. That's crazy. It's interesting the mention your mention of the pyramidal neurons um and their kind of play off the spindle neurons and the kind of essential elements to their role in that relationship, in the network.
Mhm.
It's it's somewhat similar to the topic that I'm going to be covering for our machine learning
Yes. Can
topic.
you go ahead and talk about that? Because my parents are like, "Hey, you need to come home so we can lock up in the
Oh,
bed." And so I just
oh,
realized
dude!
what time it
Oh my
is.
gosh! Holy crap! We've
Yeah.
been going for a while.
We've been
Um,
going for, like, at least 3 hours and 40
okay.
minutes.
Yes, I will try to cover this in 10 minutes or less.
Perfect.
The topic that we are going to be covering is called generative adversarial networks. Now, generative adversarial networks are interesting in that they are a very uncommon architecture. They don't follow typical architecture rules because for several reasons. One is that they need two different types of data and in order to work properly, and they need a they don't get their they don't have their results evaluated in the way that typically a deep learning model is evaluated, which is through a loss function
Mm.
to figure out how far off the the data is. from the original data. And these ones function basically like two networks that are fighting with each other constantly. And through that, they improve.
Mm.
And on a basic level, the you have one network that is trying to convince the other network of something who is trying to prove that network wrong. And whichever one wins that fight, the other one gets adjusted. The other network gets adjusted.
Mm.
So if one of the networks, wins, if the one network is able to prove the first one wrong, then the first one gets adjusted, vice versa. Now, you can kind of almost think of the way this works as like a forger and an art critic. A forger makes an attempt at creating a convincing enough of something real, replication, something that looks good enough to be able to fool the art
Mm.
critic. The art critic is constantly learning from real artwork and is trying to get good enough to be able to detect fakes as the information comes through. So the like I was saying earlier, two different types of data. The critic gets trained on real images as well as learning from the fake data generated uh, by the forger
Mhm.
in this analogy. And so as these two networks fight with each other, they gradually improve in their ability to handle their given task until you end up with a network that's really good at detecting fakes
Mhm.
and a network that's really good at generating fakes.
Yeah.
And so these models, what's nice about these models is that you now have two highly trained models at these tasks. A lot of times, um, the second model that was classified, the classification model was thrown away. Is thrown away because GANs are often used for the generator portion of it. But it doesn't have to be the case, and sometimes it's not. And um, so these models are incredibly useful for tasks such as detecting fake images, detecting um, fraudulent activities and or IDs, detecting uh, incorrect facial data.
Mm.
So for security, things
Yeah.
the um, and are also good at really at generating um, some high quality, true almost true to life data for things like image generation or whatnot. And so there's a lot of uses for them. Under the hood, you have the generator and the discriminator is what they're called. You get the generator that creates the content, the discriminator that tries to tell if it's a generated content or if it is a real. Um, and that kind of different sub architectures in the way that that plays out. But in general, that's the two that's the main kind of components that make that possible is these two networks just constantly fighting with each other.
Mhm.
They tend to be a little touchy, like their settings. You have to get their settings
Mhm.
just right, otherwise you could end up with something, that is way overtrained or way overtuned or
Yeah.
um, and stuff. And so you have to be careful with them, but they can lead to some pretty impressive results.
Mhm.
And that is, in its essence, is what generative adversarial networks are.
That's really cool. And
Yeah.
that actually one last thought before we close it out. You said that these kind of bounce off each other until they get to, the level of refinement necessary. What I'm curious about is if there could actually be, maybe this might be a little too much data for it, but where we have two models battling out an idea or a topic, and they keep trying to convince themselves, and it gets more and more sophisticated as you keep going up. As one gets convinced, once one becomes almost, true to life right about it, what would be interesting is to see the other model, well, then argue about its interpretation of that correct data, and then a further more in like almost a more almost like a different analysis that's built off of that initial combative
So you're saying
idea.
once they learn off of the data, the initial data, having them kind of expanding that data pool and then further training them to be able to handle
Mhm.
more different types of
Yeah,
data.
like the questions that come out of the truth of the relevant
Well,
data.
that's kind of what you're describing is kind of the process that's used in machine learning called transfer learning,
Mm.
where you train a base model for something and or for a specific task to maybe test or prove an architecture, and then you expand its training or fine tune its training, but basically transferring the neurons to another version that then gets modified in some way.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of similar. And what I was going to say was the we have a form, and I'd be interested to look into the biology of how this actually plays out on a neuron scale, but we have a form of GAN in our heads that at play of that architecture, where we we both generate and learned to discriminate based off of the real life examples and how true that example is that we created. Like for
Mhm.
instance, if I'm trying to if I'm a forger trying to fool an art critic or something, I have my own built-in generator and discriminator,
Yeah.
and I might create something initially that looks really good to me, but then as I see more art examples, I'm like, oh crap, that was really bad. Actually, like I need to try again, And then like as I see more art examples, I'm like, nope, that's not right, and so we have this process that we do for
Mhm.
ourselves that in our heads that helps us learn skills like that.
Yeah.
And that process and that ability to refine that network through trial, error, classification, gathering of more data, that kind of thing is a key component to
Mhm.
us being able to learn skills that we learn, because we can't learn it all at once
Yeah.
typically. It's a matter of like slowly we kind of slowly lose our delusions, so to speak. I remember thinking when I first started coding, I got finished with the quote unquote advanced Python course that I was taking at the time. I remember thinking, dude, I'm a master. I'm so good at Python.
Yes.
Like I can do anything now. And it was that delusion of not knowing what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that gradually gets stripped away as you see more realistic examples of what mastery looks like,
Mhm.
and then you start training yourself more and trying to get there, and so that's that generator
Yeah.
discriminator process.
Mhm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. Definitely. All
All
right.
right.
Jinx.
Well, this has been a long one. I didn't
Definitely a long
realize
one.
how long we'd been
Yeah.
going.
That
I
one
think
went for a while.
we are both a little antsy because of the fact that we've done so much
I know.
bug debugging and technical difficulties that
Yes.
we kind of we had that dopamine pull of wanting to do a
Ready to
podcast
go,
that
go,
ended
go.
up
Then once we
leading us
started,
into
it's
a
just like
3-hour podcast.
I think over 3 hours.
Really?
Definitely over 3 hours. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
All right, well, he
Indubitably.
has a bit ways home to travel, so
Yep.
we're gonna say goodnight to you guys. Thank you so
Yes.
much for watching. Um, let us know if you guys want us to cover any topics. Um, and as always, follow your curiosity and join us again next week